A 75-year-old wealthy woman was abandoned by her children at a nursing home in LA. When she passed away, they returned to divide her assets, but her final words left them frozen. At 75 years old, Elizabeth Carrington was a woman who had weathered countless storms. Yet her heart remained tender and steadfast in its devotion to her family. Her life, marked by sacrifices and deep love for her children, had brought her both joy and heartbreak. In her youth, Elizabeth had been a vibrant soul, a woman with dreams of her own, but like many mothers, she had set her ambitions aside to raise her children, providing them with the support, education, and opportunities she had never been given herself. Her love for them was fierce and unconditional, her entire life dedicated to ensuring they would have a brighter future. Now, however, Elizabeth spent her days alone in a small room at a nursing home on the outskirts of Los Angeles. The pastel walls, the stark fluorescent lights, and the sterile hallways were a stark contrast to the lively home she had once created for her family. It had been years since her children had last visited, leaving Elizabeth to quietly navigate the final chapters of her life with only the companionship of the nurses and the occasional visit from kind-hearted volunteers. The staff often marveled at her resilience and calm demeanor. They would see her sitting by her window each evening, looking out into the courtyard with a distant gaze, as if searching for something or someone who never arrived. Her children, each now grown with families and careers of their own, had drifted far from the woman who had once been their world. There were three of them, David, Laura, and Peter, all successful, each one carving out impressive careers across different cities. They had once been close, a family bound tightly by love and Elizabeth's unyielding commitment. But time, distance, and the demands of life had loosened those ties. In their busyness, they had forgotten the many sacrifices Elizabeth had made for them, relegating their visits and calls to the bottom of their priority lists. David, the eldest, was a corporate lawyer whose days and nights blurred together in a haze of deadlines and negotiations. His ambition knew no limits. He had spent years climbing the ranks of his law firm, driven by the desire to secure a prestigious life for his own family. Laura, the middle child, was a doctor with a demanding schedule, constantly moving between patients, research, and conferences. And Peter, the youngest, was a technology entrepreneur, always on the move, chasing the next big venture and often traveling internationally. Each of them loved their mother in their own way, but their love had grown cold, obscured by their individual lives. To them, Elizabeth was a figure from the past, a cherished yet distant presence. They would occasionally send gifts or cards on her birthday and holidays, brief tokens of affection sent from afar. But as the years went by, the calls became fewer, and their voices on the other end of the line grew increasingly detached, as though speaking to Elizabeth was simply another task to be checked off. Despite this, Elizabeth never harbored bitterness. She had long accepted that they had their lives to live, and she was content to love them from afar. She would tell herself that this was the natural order of things. Children grow up and move on, just as she had once done herself. And yet, as much as she tried to quell the loneliness, a part of her ached for the closeness they had once shared. The photos on her bedside table, their laughing faces from years past, were her constant companions, reminders of a time when her children had been, of all people, her life's purpose. Some nights, Elizabeth would reminisce about the days when her home was filled with the sounds of laughter, footsteps racing down the hall, and whispered secrets. She remembered the countless nights spent comforting them after nightmares, the scraped knees she had carefully bandaged, and the meals she had cooked with love, hopping to give them warmth and comfort. Her hands, now frail and wrinkled, had once cradled their small bodies, held them tightly, and let them go when it was time for them to find their own paths. Those memories brought her solace in the quiet of the nursing home, though they often left a bittersweet pang in her heart. As her health began to decline, Elizabeth knew that her time was nearing its end. She had made peace with this truth, her heart calm and filled with gratitude for the life she had led despite its hardships. She felt no resentment toward her children. If anything, she held on to hope that they would someday remember the love she had poured into them, the sacrifices she had made without hesitation. Her love for them remained as strong as ever, unchanging in its depth. There was one thing Elizabeth had prepared before her passing, a carefully crafted will outlining her final wishes. She knew that her children, despite their absence, would return upon her death, driven by the hope of an inheritance. She had no illusions about this. She understood the realities of human nature and the ways that material wealth could often overshadow emotional bonds. But in her final gesture, Elizabeth hoped to leave them with something more valuable than money, a heartfelt lesson, a reminder of what truly mattered in life. Elizabeth's passing was quiet and unceremonious. She slipped away peacefully in the night, her face calm as though she were merely drifting into a long-awaited sleep. The staff mourned her loss, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that this gentle, loving woman had lived her last days in solitude. They cared for her remains with respect, arranging her belongings and notifying her family with a sense of quiet reverence. When news of her death reached David, Laura, and Peter, each reacted in their own way, shock, sadness, and a flicker of guilt that they quickly pushed aside. They knew they needed to return to Lo's Angels, to the place where their mother's life had ended, and where they assumed a sizable inheritance awaited them. None of them were prepared for the lesson that Elizabeth had left behind, nor for the way her final words would reach into the depths of their hearts, forever changing the course of their lives. On a quiet morning in early autumn, Elizabeth Carrington passed away peacefully in her sleep. The staff at the nursing home discovered her still form, her hands resting gently over her heart, and her face wearing an expression of serene acceptance. There was no commotion, no final words. Elizabeth had simply drifted away in the night like a leaf gracefully falling from a tree. As the staff prepared her room and arranged her belongings with solemn respect, word of her passing quickly reached her children, who each reacted to the news in their own way. David, busy with a mountain of paperwork at his law firm, received the call from the nursing home's administrator. He took a deep breath, leaned back in his office chair, and closed his eyes. Well, he muttered to himself, it was bound to happen sooner or later. He allowed himself a brief pause before returning to his work, leaving plans to return home to Lowe's Angels as something he'd handle after his meetings were finished. Laura, who was in the middle of her hospital rounds, got the message from a nurse. The news hit her unexpectedly, and she stopped in her tracks, staring at the text for a long moment. A flicker of sadness briefly crossed her face, but it was quickly replaced with practicality. She pushed through the rest of her shift, her thoughts oscillating between the clinical demands of her job and the vague arrangements she would need to make for her mother's final farewell. She had a long life, she rationalized to herself, and she must have expected this. Peter, traveling abroad to secure a new tech partnership, learned of his mother's passing in the middle of an investor meeting. His first reaction was frustration, irritated by the interruption. After quickly excusing himself, he sighed, a mixture of guilt and impatience flashing across his face. Well, that's it, I suppose, he thought. He sent a few quick messages to his assistant, notifying his siblings he would return as soon as he could, and proceeded to wrap up his obligations overseas. The following week, David, Laura, and Peter each arrived in Lowe's Angels. They had returned not out of longing or a sense of personal loss, but more out of duty and perhaps in anticipation of what they assumed would be an inheritance. Their mother, after all, had once owned a beautiful, sizable home, and with her modest savings and pension, they assumed there would be a fair sum left for them. It wasn't that they were heartless. Each had simply grown accustomed to a life where their mother's existence was a distant part of their history, rather than an active part of their present. They gathered at the nursing home's small chapel, the only setting available for her brief service. The staff who had cared for Elizabeth during her final years were present as well, offering quiet condolences and sharing a few words about her kindness and resilience. The siblings, however, sat silently, each caught up in their own thoughts. They exchanged polite nods with the nurses and occasionally glanced at their watches, their minds more focused on the logistics of returning to their lives than on the ceremony itself. After the service, the administrator approached them with a reserved expression. "Your mother left her final wishes with her lawyer," she explained. "Mr. Jensen will be in touch to arrange the reading of her will. He mentioned that she had specific instructions she wanted followed." This piqued the siblings' interest, and they quickly agreed to meet with the lawyer the next day. Each of them had expected a simple division of her assets, but hearing about specific instructions stirred a small degree of curiosity, even anticipation. Elizabeth had always been a woman of modest means, but her home had been in a sought-after part of Los Angeles, and any additional investments or savings would likely provide them each with a comfortable share. The next morning they arrived at the lawyer's office, an elegantly furnished room lined with dark wood and filled with the scent of polished leather. Mr. Jensen, an older gentleman who had known Elizabeth for many years, greeted them with a calm yet somber demeanor. He gestured for them to sit and opened a small leather-bound portfolio. "Your mother was a thoughtful woman, and she made clear arrangements for how she wanted her estate handled," he began, adjusting his glasses as he glanced at her will. "I have known Mrs. Carrington for many years, and she took great care to ensure her intentions were honored. She wanted each of you to know that her decision was made with a full heart and a deep love for each of you." David, Laura, and Peter exchanged glances. They sat up slightly, their focus sharpened by Mr. Jensen's words. The lawyer looked over the document once more before speaking. A stunned silence filled the room as her children stared at him in disbelief. David's mouth opened slightly, while Laura and Peter exchanged bewildered looks. This was not what they had expected. "Excuse me," David finally managed, his voice laced with incredulity. "Are you saying she gave away everything?" Mr. Jensen nodded solemnly. "Yes, nearly all of it. Your mother left the entirety of her financial holdings and the proceeds from her home to several charitable organizations. She was passionate about supporting causes related to elder care and youth education. In fact, she arranged for much of it to go to local programs here in Los Angeles." The siblings were speechless. This wasn't the simple inheritance meeting they had anticipated. The realization struck them deeply. None of the financial gain they had counted on would come their way. As their thoughts tumbled over each other, caught between disappointment and confusion, Mr. Jensen cleared his throat. "However," he added, "Mrs. Carrington did leave each of you with something." He reached into a drawer, pulling out a small, intricately carved wooden box with a polished surface that glistened faintly under the office lights. He placed it gently on the table in front of them, his hand resting on it as he explained. "This," he said, "was one of her most treasured possessions. She left this for the three of you along with a letter inside. She left a message she hoped you would each read carefully." With a sense of foreboding and curiosity, they watched as Mr. Jensen opened the box and removed a neatly folded letter. The siblings leaned in, each feeling a strange mix of resentment and apprehension. What could their mother possibly have left them if it wasn't her financial assets? They felt deprived, almost cheated by her decision to donate everything. And yet there was a growing feeling in the room that whatever she had left in that letter might hold something far more valuable than they had initially considered. Mr. Jensen handed the letter to David, who looked at it for a moment before reluctantly beginning to read aloud. The quiet in the room deepened as his voice filled the air, his siblings listening intently. The letter began simply, her words immediately pulling them into a world they hadn't allowed themselves to enter in years. In her letter, Elizabeth spoke of her life, her thoughts, and her love for each of them. She expressed her understanding that life had taken them down different paths, and acknowledged that she had not wanted to interfere. She reminded them of the moments they had shared, the sacrifices she had made, and the love she had poured into each of their lives. Her words were gentle yet filled with a wisdom they had forgotten, and slowly her children's disappointment began to give way to an aching sense of regret and longing. As they continued reading, Elizabeth's words revealed her desire for them to remember the importance of family, of unity, and of living a life built on compassion. She asked them not to focus on material wealth, but to find meaning in their connections to each other and to those less fortunate. She wrote, "I may not be with you, but my love will always remain as long as you hold it close to your hearts." And as the final words sank in, the reality of her love and her legacy settled into their minds, leaving them with a feeling they couldn't quite describe. A quiet, powerful reminder of a mother's enduring love. In the quiet, opulent office of Mr. Jensen, the family lawyer, David, Laura, and Peter sat across from the mahogany desk, their faces composed yet filled with eager anticipation. The siblings, who rarely found time for each other in their bustling lives, had each made arrangements to attend this meeting, assuming it would be straightforward. Elizabeth Carrington, their mother, had left behind a significant estate, and each of them was ready to claim their share. They exchanged brief, polite nods and glances, but no words passed between them. The distance that had grown over years was evident, each sibling absorbed in thoughts of what lay ahead. David, the eldest, was a man accustomed to negotiations and paperwork, and he sat with his arms crossed, looking almost impatient. Laura, professional yet poised, maintained a faint air of detachment, though she couldn't hide the flicker of curiosity in her eyes. Peter, the youngest and most restless, drummed his fingers on his knee, eager to see what inheritance awaited him. Mr. Jensen cleared his throat, his eyes gentle but serious as he looked over Elizabeth's will, the final piece of her legacy that had brought her children together, albeit reluctantly. He looked at each of them in turn, his expression contemplative, as if he were choosing his words carefully. "First," he began, "I would like to say how much your mother cherished each of you. Elizabeth often spoke to me about her hopes, her dreams, and her love for her children. She left behind something meaningful, a parting message that I believe she hoped would reach you all, even if she couldn't express it to you directly." Mr. Jensen nodded, folding his hands on the desk as he looked down at the papers. "As you may be aware, your mother's estate was substantial. She had saved diligently throughout her life, built a comfortable home, and accumulated assets amounting to several $1 million. A spark lit up in Peter's eyes, and Laura's expression softened into something more hopeful. Each of them leaned in, poised to hear what they assumed would be a sizable inheritance divided among them. But Mr. Jensen continued, "Your mother made a specific request regarding her estate." He looked up, catching their gazes one by one. The room held a charged silence, tension mounting as they waited for him to reveal Elizabeth's final decision. "Your mother," he said, voice steady, "chose to donate the entirety of her estate to charity." The silence that followed was deafening. David, Laura, and Peter each wore expressions of shock, their faces a mixture of disbelief and confusion. Only James remained motionless. "What?" David said, his voice barely a whisper. his mind struggling to comprehend what he had just heard. He shifted uncomfortably, leaning back in his chair as if to distance himself from the news. "All of it?" "Yes," Mr. Jensen replied, his tone gentle but firm. "Your mother arranged to have her assets directed towards causes she felt passionate about, including organizations that support elder care, educational scholarships for underprivileged youth, and local community programs here in Los Angeles." Laura blinked, her face growing pale as the realization set in. "So there's nothing? She didn't leave us anything?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "There is no financial inheritance," Mr. Jensen confirmed, watching them carefully. "However, your mother did leave something for each of you." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "A parting gift, a final message." Reaching under his desk, Mr. Jensen pulled out an old, intricately carved wooden box. Its surface was worn yet polished, each groove of the carved patterns glinting faintly under the office lights. He placed it gently on the desk, his hand resting on the top as he looked back at the siblings. "This," he said, "was among your mother's most treasured possessions. She left this for all three of you along with a letter." He opened the box, revealing a neatly folded envelope placed delicately on top of a few small keepsakes. The letter bore Elizabeth's distinctive handwriting, her name signed across the front. Around it lay various mementos, an old photograph, a tiny hand-carved figurine, and a delicate locket. Each item held a part of their shared past, fragments of memories they had once held dear but had let slip away. David reached for the envelope, holding it in his hand for a moment, the weight of his mother's last words pressing down on him. He looked at his siblings, a brief glance of hesitation passing between them before he carefully unfolded the letter and began to read aloud. The letter began simply, "My dearest children, if you are reading this, it means I have left this world behind. I know that life has taken each of you in different directions, and that perhaps I failed to keep us together as a family, but I have loved each of you deeply, with a love that words can scarcely convey." Then David's voice trembled over her words. Laura and Peter leaned closer, their expressions shifting from shock to something softer, something tinged with emotion. The letter continued. "Life was often difficult, and there were times when we struggled as a family. I know each of you faced your own challenges, your own disappointments and dreams, and I am proud of the people you have become, even if I didn't always have the chance to say it." The words seemed to reach across time, filling the room with the echo of Elizabeth's voice, her love welling through every carefully chosen phrase. "I know that my decision to give my possessions to charity may come as a surprise. My hope is that this choice will serve as a reminder of what truly matters in life. Money, while useful, is not a replacement for love, for family, for the simple moments we shared when you were young. In the end, what we leave behind is not our wealth, but the memories, the kindness, and the love we give." Laura's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, the reality of her mother's words settling heavily upon her. She glanced down at the small trinkets in the box, items she recognized from her childhood. A tiny figurine of a horse she had once cherished, a photograph of the three siblings as children with Elizabeth smiling warmly behind them. These were things that held no monetary value but held memories of love, joy, and togetherness, a time long forgotten. David continued reading, his voice growing softer. "Each of you is my treasure, my joy. I chose to leave behind these keepsakes because they represent the essence of our family, the moments that were dear to my heart. If I could ask anything of you now, it would be to find a way back to each other, to remember that family is more than blood, more than proximity. In the box, you'll find a locket that belonged to my mother, something she passed to me, and now I pass to you. Keep it as a reminder that family is forever, even when we're apart." Peter's usually restless demeanor had quieted, his fingers tracing the edges of the wooden box as if trying to absorb the emotions it contained. Each of them felt Elizabeth's love in a way they hadn't in years, a presence that was as real as if she were sitting there with them. Her final words continued, a gentle plea. "I hope you will carry this love with you and let it guide you in the choices you make. Remember, I am always with you, not in wealth but in the memories we share, in the love that connects us. Be kind to one another and know that you were always my greatest joy." As David finished reading, a heavy silence filled the room. No one spoke, each lost in their thoughts, overwhelmed by the quiet, powerful reminder of their mother's love. The inheritance they had come seeking was not in the form of money or property, but something infinitely more valuable, a lesson in the unbreakable bonds of family, a plea for unity, and a legacy of love that transcended wealth. In that moment, the disappointment they had felt over the lack of material inheritance faded, replaced by an understanding of Elizabeth's true gift. She had given them a parting lesson, an invitation to rediscover the value of family, the importance of compassion, and the enduring power of a mother's love. The lawyer's office was quiet as David, Laura, and Peter sat around the small wooden box that their mother, Elizabeth, had left for them. The initial shock of learning that she had donated all her assets to charity had been overwhelming, but the presence of the box containing remnants of their shared past created an unexpected stillness in the room. It was as if Elizabeth's spirit lingered, waiting for her children to finally see her, hear her, and understand the depth of her love. David lifted the lid slowly, his hands trembling slightly. Inside lay objects that seemed humble at first glance, things that held no monetary value but carried the weight of countless memories. He reached in and picked up a worn, yellowed photograph, its edges frayed from years of handling. It was a picture of the three siblings as children, their young faces radiant with smiles as Elizabeth knelt behind them, her arms wrapped around each of them with a look of joy on her face. Laura's hand moved to her mouth as she looked closer at the picture. She remembered that day. They had gone to the park as a family, and her mother had packed their favorite sandwiches, even cutting the crusts off just the way they liked. She could still remember the warmth of the sunlight that day, the laughter that had filled the air, and the gentle comfort of her mother's touch as they played together. Beneath the photograph lay a small, delicate doll with faded blue eyes. Peter picked it up, his fingers brushing over its tiny hand-sewn dress. This doll had been his sister Laura's favorite toy when they were little, a gift from their mother on Laura's 5th birthday. He remembered how Laura had slept with it every night, refusing to go anywhere without her doll. He hadn't thought about that doll in years, but holding it now brought back flashes of moments from their childhood. The nights their mother had tucked them into bed, singing softly to soothe their fears. Next, David lifted a small leather-bound notebook from the box, its cover faded and worn. Inside, the handwriting was unmistakable. It was their mother's careful, looping script, the same handwriting they remembered from birthday cards and school notes. The first few pages were filled with entries detailing each of their childhood milestones, their first steps, their favorite foods, their first words. The journal captured not only facts, but Elizabeth's love, her observations, and her joy at being their mother. Every entry radiated her pride and devotion. "She wrote everything down," Laura whispered, her voice thick with emotion as she ran her fingers over the ink. She remembered every little thing. As they flipped through the pages, they each realized just how deeply Elizabeth had loved them, how much she had cherished each moment, and yet in their adult lives they had moved away, allowing distance and time to separate them from the person who had loved them most unconditionally. Nestled in the box was the final item, a neatly folded letter. David held it up, his fingers unsteady as he unfolded it. He glanced at Laura and Peter, both of whom nodded silently, urging him to read. David took a deep breath and began to read their mother's last words. "My dearest children, if you're reading this, then I am no longer with you. I wish I could have told each of you these things in person, but life sometimes has other plans. I'm grateful for the time we had together, and I hope you remember me not just as your mother, but as a woman who loved you with everything she had. As you grew older, each of you went out into the world, following your own paths, and I have always been so proud of you. Watching you succeed was my greatest joy, even from a distance. But in the quiet moments, I missed you terribly. I missed our talks, our laughter, and the warmth of family dinners. I missed being the one you came to for advice or comfort. I know that life has a way of separating people, and I never wanted to hold you back, but my heart always longed to keep our family together, to hold you close even when I could no longer be by your side. Each of you carries a piece of my heart, and though we may have been apart, my love for you never wavered." By this point, David's voice broke, and he had to pause. Laura and Peter each had tears in their eyes, their expressions a mixture of sorrow and longing as they absorbed their mother's words. Their minds flooded with memories of the love they had taken for granted, the simple gestures that now seemed monumental. David continued reading, his voice softer but filled with a reverence he hadn't felt before. "You may wonder why I chose to donate my assets. I hope you can understand that I wanted to leave behind more than material wealth. I wanted to remind you that life is about more than possessions or achievements. It's about the connections we make, the kindness we share, and the love we give freely. Money is transient, my dear children, but love endures. I have left you these small keepsakes not for their value, but as reminders of our shared moments, our laughter, and the love that filled our home. Please hold on to these memories, remember who you are and the love that was woven into every part of our family." Laura clutched the doll to her chest, her eyes brimming with regret. She thought of the many years she had spent building her career, the hours she had sacrificed to get to where she was, and the numerous times she had told herself that she would visit her mother next month. Now, next month was a time that would never come, and the finality of that reality crushed her. Peter, too, felt a sharp pang of guilt. His relentless pursuit of success, his constant moving from one opportunity to another, had it all been worth the distance it had created between him and his mother? He could still recall her gentle words of encouragement, the way she'd always told him she believed in him. She had given so much of herself so that he could succeed, and he had given her so little in return. David's voice quavered as he reached the last lines of the letter. "If there is one thing I wish for each of you, it is that you find a way back to each other. Love each other, support each other, and be the family that I have always dreamed of. I will always be with you in spirit, watching over you as I always have. Remember, my dear children, I loved you more than words can ever express. With all my love, Mom." When David finished reading, silence settled over them, deeper and more profound than any they had ever known. Elizabeth's letter was more than a final goodbye. It was a reminder, a lesson, and a call to rediscover the love they had shared but forgotten. Her words lingered in the air, wrapping around them like a warm embrace, each of them feeling her presence as if she were there beside them, holding their hands one last time. The siblings sat quietly, each reflecting on their own lives, their choices, and the love they had overlooked in their pursuit of ambition. It was as though Elizabeth had finally reached them, her love cutting through the wall they had built around their hearts, awakening memories they had buried in the recesses of their minds. The items in the box, the photograph, the doll, the notebook, and the locket, were no longer just objects. They were symbols of their mother's undying love, each one carrying a memory, a moment, a piece of her heart. And they realized that despite her absence, Elizabeth had given them the greatest inheritance of all, a lesson in love, family, and the importance of togetherness. For the first time in years, they looked at each other not with the distance of strangers, but with the understanding of siblings united by the love of a remarkable woman. Their mother had left them, but her legacy lived on, not in wealth, but in the family bonds she had cultivated, bonds that her letter had revived, stronger and more enduring than any fortune. As the weight of Elizabeth's letter sank in, David, Laura, and Peter were left sitting in silence, their mother's words lingering like a bittersweet melody in their minds. For the first time in years, each of them felt a pang of deep, unshakable regret. They were confronted not only with the love they had neglected, but also with the painful reality of their own indifference. The clarity that Elizabeth's words had brought was a gentle yet profound reminder of everything they had taken for granted. David felt an overwhelming sense of remorse. He remembered his mother's sacrifices, all the nights she stayed up late working to provide for them, the countless ways she had been their rock, their constant source of comfort. As a lawyer, he had spent his life chasing success, often pushing aside family in his pursuit of professional goals. But now, in the quiet presence of his mother's final words, he realized just how much he had missed, how many opportunities to be with her he had allowed to slip away. Laura, too, found herself reflecting on the choices she had made. She thought back to her younger years when she dreamed of becoming a doctor to help people, an ambition her mother had fully supported. Elizabeth had always encouraged her, telling her to follow her heart and make a difference in the world. But somewhere along the way, Laura had lost sight of that purpose, allowing her career to consume her, losing touch with the person her mother had inspired her to be. The guilt weighed heavily on her heart, knowing that she had drifted so far from her mother's love, even as Elizabeth continued to support her from a distance. Peter, the youngest, felt the sharpest sting of all. He had spent years chasing financial success, moving from place to place, always looking for the next opportunity to grow his wealth. In his mind, he told himself that success would make his mother proud, that his achievements would speak for themselves. But sitting in that quiet office, surrounded by the simple keepsakes their mother had left, he realized that it wasn't wealth or prestige Elizabeth had wanted for them. She had wanted them to find fulfillment in each other, in love, and in kindness. The possessions in the wooden box, the photograph, the doll, the locket, all reminded him that what mattered most were the moments they had shared, the memories she had cherished, and the love she had poured into each of their lives. After a long silence, David looked at his siblings, a sense of determination in his eyes. "Mom's letter. It was her last wish for us, wasn't it?" he said quietly. "She wanted us to remember her not just with words, but with actions." Laura nodded, her gaze softening as she held the small doll close to her heart. "She gave us so much love, and we barely even showed up for her in the end," she whispered, her voice breaking. Maybe it's not too late to make things right." With renewed purpose, the three siblings decided to unite, setting aside their busy lives to fulfill the final wish their mother had so lovingly expressed in her letter. They made a collective decision to come together, to live out Elizabeth's legacy of kindness and compassion. No longer focused on their own ambitions or material wealth, they realized that true fulfillment could only be found in the shared love that Elizabeth had so selflessly given them. In the months that followed, David, Laura, and Peter began a new chapter in their lives. They organized charity events in honor of their mother, raising funds for elder care and youth education, the very causes Elizabeth had so passionately supported. They visited nursing homes, sharing stories, listening to residents, and providing company to those who were alone. For the first time, they were living out the values their mother had instilled in them: compassion, gratitude, and love. On the anniversary of Elizabeth's passing, the siblings organized a charity event in her honor. They gathered with friends, family, and community members, sharing stories of their mother's kindness and strength, celebrating the woman who had shaped their lives. It was a bittersweet evening filled with laughter and tears, a tribute to a life lived fully and a legacy of love that had left an indelible mark on everyone Elizabeth had touched. Standing together, David, Laura, and Peter felt a profound sense of peace. They had lost their mother, but in her absence, they had found each other once again. Through her parting message, Elizabeth had brought them together, bridging the distances that time and ambition had created. Her memory had become their guiding light, her love a foundation upon which they could rebuild their relationships and honor her wishes. As the event drew to a close, the siblings gathered by a small memorial they had set up in their mother's name. They each placed a hand on the wooden box, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over them. "She taught us that love is the only legacy that matters," David said softly, his voice filled with reverence. Laura nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "And now it's up to us to carry that love forward." Peter smiled, his heart lighter than it had felt in years. "To Mom," he whispered, his voice steady, "may we live our lives in a way that makes her proud." In that moment, they felt Elizabeth's presence, as if she were standing there with them, her love woven through their lives, binding them together in a way that no distance or time could ever break. The story of Elizabeth Carrington ended, but her legacy continued through the lives of her children, through acts of kindness and unity. David, Laura, and Peter carried forth her message, touching the lives of others with the same love their mother had given to them. Elizabeth's final wish had not only reunited her family, but had also planted the seeds of compassion and gratitude that would continue to bloom in the hearts of everyone they touched. And so, with a deep sense of purpose and peace, the siblings began their journey anew, honoring their mother's memory with every step, every gesture, and every life they changed. Thank you for joining us in this heartfelt journey of Elizabeth and her family. Her story reminds us all of the priceless value of love,